December 1944, the Ardennes. A forest shrouded in fog, snow falling thick, and silence so deep you could hear your own breath freezing. Then the roar of engines, gunfire and chaos. The Battle of the Bulge had begun, Hitler's last desperate gamble to crush the Allies and reclaim the Western Front. In the middle of that chaos, one Sherman tank, battle-scarred, limping, and running on fumes, crawled through the smoke near a Belgian village. Inside sat Sergeant James Keller and his crew, exhausted after days of fighting. Their tank had taken hits, their supplies were low and their spirits nearly gone. Then, in the worst possible moment, the unthinkable happened. The Sherman's engine coughed, sputtered and died. For the German soldiers closing in from the tree line, it was a gift. They cheered, laughing as they watched the American tank go silent. To them it was one more symbol of Allied collapse. But inside that cold steel coffin, Sergeant Keller wasn't ready to surrender. He slammed his fist on the console and growled, "She's not dead yet." What followed was something no one on either side would ever forget. A story of desperation, defiance, and a machine that refused to die. In the heart of winter's fury, one American tank crew showed the world that courage and ingenuity could turn even failure into firepower. This is the true story of the Sherman that came back from the dead, so to see, and how its resurrection turned a small battle in the Ardennes into a symbol of unbreakable will. The forest around them was quiet now, the kind of quiet that comes after destruction. Snow drifted softly through the broken trees, settling over the wreckage of trucks and bodies. Sergeant James Keller could feel the hum of his Sherman tank fading into nothing as the engine coughed once, twice, then died. The sound lingered for a moment, the metallic tick of cooling steel, the faint hiss of escaping steam, and then it was gone. The crew sat in silence, each man staring at the floor or the frozen window slits as the reality sank in. They were alone, cut off, and their only protection had just given out. Outside, the forest wasn't as silent as it seemed. From somewhere in the distance came laughter, sharp, cruel, unmistakably German. The enemy had seen them stall. Through the falling snow, dark figures began to emerge, cautious at first, then growing bolder, a dozen, maybe more. Their weapons glinted faintly in the grey light. One of them pointed toward the motionless Sherman and shouted something that made the others laugh again. Keller clenched his jaw. He could feel the heat of embarrassment and rage under his freezing skin. "Engines frozen," muttered Corporal Dent, the mechanic, breaking the silence. "Fuel lines probably cracked from the cold. Oil's like sludge. We're dead in the water." Keller didn't respond right away. He looked at his men. 4 faces pale from exhaustion and fear. Men who'd gone 3 days without sleep, fighting through ambushes and artillery fire. Outside, the laughter grew louder. It wasn't just mockery anymore. It was confidence. The Germans thought they'd won. Keller finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "We're not done." Private Simmons looked up from the turret. "With all due respect, Sarge, she's done for. We can't even radio for help. The battery's dead. Then we fix it," Keller said flatly. He pulled on his gloves, climbed up through the hatch, and dropped into the freezing air. The wind bit at his face, slicing through his coat like knives. He could smell the oil, burnt and heavy, leaking from the engine vents. He grabbed a wrench from the side compartment and motioned for Dent to join him. "Cover us," he ordered. The other 3 nodded silently and took their positions. One manned the hull gun. Another scanned the fog for movement. Keller and Dent lifted the heavy engine hatch. A cloud of black smoke rolled out, choking them both. The engine looked worse than he expected. A cracked fuel line, ice forming along the manifold, and a battery that was more ice block than metal. Dent cursed under his breath. "She's gone, Jim. You can't start a corpse." Keller didn't answer. He stared at the engine like a doctor staring down a dying patient. "We'll see about that." From the trees came the sharp crack of a rifle. A bullet pinged off the Sherman's hull, throwing sparks. Keller ducked instinctively, then kept working. "They're just trying to scare us," he said. "Don't give them that satisfaction." Dent hesitated. "You're crazy." "Yeah," Keller said quietly, tightening a frozen bolt. "But so's this tank." He reached down, scraping frost off the ignition lines, his hands shaking from cold and exhaustion. The sound of approaching boots echoed faintly across the snow. Keller knew they were closing in, a few dozen men at least. Every second mattered now. He yelled down through the hatch, "Get ready to fire when I say go." The crew inside tensed, unsure whether to believe him. Keller twisted the wrench again, his breath clouding in front of his face. The metal felt brittle, ready to snap. "Come on, girl," he muttered, his voice trembling with desperation. "Not now." Not here. He hit the starter, nothing, just a click. Dent looked away. "That's it, she's gone." Keller slammed his fist against the steel. "No, she's not." He hit the starter again. Another click and then a sputter. A weak coughing noise. Keller froze, eyes wide. He hit it again. The engine groaned, then coughed once more, louder this time, as if answering him. A third time, and suddenly a roar. Deep, guttural, alive. The Germans in the field stopped. Their laughter turned into confusion. Keller climbed back into the turret, his face streaked with grease, his hands numb but trembling with energy. "Let's give 'em something to cheer about," he growled. Inside the tank, his crew came back to life with him. The gunner swung the turret toward the tree line. The driver slammed the transmission into gear. The Sherman's treads bit into the snow, grinding forward again. Outside, the laughter was gone, replaced by shouting. The Germans, moments ago triumphant, now ran for cover as the resurrected beast roared through the forest once more, fire spitting from its barrel. In that moment, the line between man and machine blurred completely. The dead had come back to life, and its heart, forged from steel and stubbornness, beat louder than ever. The sudden roar of the engine seemed to shake the very air, echoing through the forest like thunder rolling through the mountains. The Germans who had been advancing stopped in their tracks, startled. For a moment, none of them could quite believe what they were hearing. That Sherman tank, the one they'd seen go silent, the one they had mocked and surrounded, was alive again. And worse, it was turning toward them. Sergeant Keller's eyes narrowed as he peered through the periscope. The enemy was scattered, some diving for cover, others fumbling with their weapons. He could see the fear forming in their movements, that split-second hesitation that comes when soldiers realize the victory they thought was theirs has just been ripped away. "Target the tree line." 2 o'clock, Keller barked. Inside the cramped metal hull, his crew moved like clockwork. Every motion was instinctive, every word curt and sharp. They'd done this 100 times before, and yet this time it felt different. There wasn't just survival anymore. It was defiance. The gunner swung the turret with a metallic whine, aligning the cannon on a cluster of German infantry crouched near a wrecked half-track. "Loaded!" shouted Simmons, the loader, slamming a shell into place. Keller's voice was steady, almost cold. "Fire!" The cannon boomed, the entire tank rocking back from the force. A plume of smoke and snow shot into the air where the Germans had been. The survivors scattered, their once taunting laughter replaced by shouts of alarm. Keller didn't let them breathe. Next target, left side of the ridge. The Sherman's gun turned again, the sound of gears grinding under strain. The tank had been half dead minutes ago, but now it moved like something possessed. The tracks churned through the snow, kicking up debris as it advanced. Every meter it gained was a statement, a declaration that this war wasn't just fought with bullets and armor, but with willpower and sheer stubbornness. The Germans tried to regroup, a few of them firing Panzerfausts from behind trees and trenches. One rocket streaked toward the Sherman, striking its side with a flash that rattled the crew inside. The armor held. Dented, scorched, but intact. Keller felt the impact in his bones but didn't flinch. "She's still with us," he muttered under his breath. "She's still fighting." Dent, who had been silent since climbing back inside, looked at him with something close to awe. "I don't know how you did it, Jim," he said, voice trembling. "I thought we were done for." Keller gave a faint, grim smile. "We were," he replied, "but she wasn't." Outside, tracer rounds whipped through the trees, glowing streaks in the cold air. Keller guided the tank forward, not just to fight, but to break the enemy's morale. He knew what this kind of shock could do to a unit. The disbelief, the panic. He'd seen it before. When soldiers thought they were safe, when they thought the fight was over. And then death came roaring back at them. The Sherman reached a clearing where the Germans had gathered their vehicles and supplies. Keller saw the opportunity immediately. "They've got fuel drums. Hit them." Another round fired. This time the explosion was deafening. Flames erupted, painting the snow orange. The Germans broke, running for the forest. A few threw down their weapons, hands raised high. The once mocking cheers had turned to screams. Through the periscope, Keller watched them flee. He didn't feel triumph, only exhaustion and a grim satisfaction that his men were still alive. The Sherman rattled to a stop, its engine growling like a tired animal. Inside, the crew sat in silence, breathing heavily. For a few seconds, all that could be heard was the hum of the revived engine. Steady, rhythmic, alive. Keller finally exhaled, leaning back in his seat. "That's what happens when you cheer too early," he said quietly. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the burning wrecks and the footprints of retreating soldiers. The Germans had laughed when his engine died, but now the only sound left was the heartbeat of the machine that refused to stay dead. The smoke still hung low over the frozen forest, curling through the trees like ghosts of the fallen. Sergeant Keller's Sherman tank idled in the clearing, its steel plates scorched and dented, the gun barrel steaming from the cold. The men inside sat in near silence, their nerves strung tight, ears ringing from the chaos they had just unleashed. But Keller knew it wasn't over. He could feel it, that uneasy stillness before the next storm. The Germans wouldn't let this humiliation go unanswered. They'd regroup, come back, and they'd be angry. Through his periscope, Keller scanned the tree line. He could see movement, faint but there. Shadows flickering between the pines. They were being watched. "They're not retreating," Keller muttered. "They're setting up." His driver Dent swallowed hard. "You think they'll bring armor?" Keller nodded. "They will. And they'll want revenge." He wasn't wrong. Minutes later, a deep, distant rumble began to echo through the woods, that unmistakable growl of heavy engines. Not trucks this time, tanks. The Germans were sending in reinforcements. The sound grew louder, the vibrations rattling loose snow from the branches. The Sherman's crew exchanged tense glances. They'd already pushed their luck once. Now facing a counterattack with limited ammo, and a patched-up engine seemed suicidal. But Keller wasn't ready to abandon the field. Not after what they'd survived. He ordered the tank repositioned near the edge of the clearing, using fallen logs and burnt-out vehicles as partial cover. "We'll make them think we've got more tanks nearby," Keller said. "We'll fight smart, not loud." The crew worked quickly, shoveling snow onto the hull to break up its outline, concealing the glint of metal under the white frost. Every man knew their lives depended on illusion now. The first German tank appeared through the trees, a Panzer IV, its grey hull camouflaged with pine branches. Behind it, infantry followed, rifles at the ready. The enemy commander clearly thought the Americans were retreating. Keller waited. The engine of the Sherman was still running, quieter now, controlled, and Keller's finger hovered over the radio's transmit button. "Hold," he whispered to his gunner. "Wait for it." When the Panzer reached the edge of the clearing, Keller gave the order. "Fire!" The 75mm gun roared again, the shells slamming into the Panzer's side armor with a sharp crack and a burst of smoke. The German tank lurched, tracks grinding to a halt. The infantry scattered, diving behind trees as another round followed. The second shell found its mark, and the Panzer erupted in flame. The Germans fired back blindly, their shots tearing through the trees and sending shards of bark flying. The Sherman's crew ducked low as rounds clanged off the hull, sparks lighting up the dim interior. Dent cursed under his breath, his knuckles white on the controls. "They're closing in, Jim." Keller's voice was steady. "Let them. We're not done yet." From behind the burning Panzer, a second German tank emerged, larger, heavier. A Tiger. Its gun turned slowly like a predator stalking its prey. The crew froze. They knew the Sherman's armor couldn't withstand a direct hit from that monster. Keller made a decision that bordered on madness. "We'll flank it," he said. "Flank it." Simmons exclaimed. "That's suicide." "Not if we move first," Keller snapped. "She's slow, we're not." Dent slammed the tank into gear and the Sherman lurched forward, swinging wide through the smoke. The Tiger's turret tracked them, but too late. They were already moving out of sight. Keller guided the gunner's aim. "Wait till you see the tracks," he ordered. "Hit 'em low." The moment the Tiger came into view again, the Sherman fired. The round struck the Tiger's treads, sending metal flying. The German tank groaned, crippled. Keller didn't wait. He fired again, then again, until the Tiger's engine belched black smoke and went still. Inside the Sherman, the men exhaled as if surfacing from underwater. The forest was quiet once more, except for the crackling fire of the destroyed tanks. Keller looked through the periscope, scanning for survivors. The Germans were gone. They had lost their will to fight. He leaned back in his seat, exhausted but unbroken. "That's two for the Sherman," he murmured, "and one for the engine that refused to quit." The morning after the battle, the forest was eerily calm. Smoke drifted lazily from the charred wrecks, and the once white snow was stained black and red. Sergeant Keller's Sherman sat motionless in the clearing, its steel hull battered but intact. The crew, huddled inside, had spent the night in silence. They were alive, but just barely. The tank's engine was coughing again, sputtering with each attempt to start. It had taken a beating, and the oil pressure gauge was dangerously low. Dent gave it a few more tries, but the sound it made was painful, like a dying animal. "She's done," he said, wiping his grease-streaked hands. This time for good. Keller didn't answer. He climbed out through the turret hatch, scanning the tree line. The battlefield was a graveyard of twisted steel, 2 German tanks smoldering, their crews gone. He took in the sight for a long moment, the cold air burning his lungs. Victory, he thought, had never felt so hollow, but as he walked back toward the Sherman, something stirred in him. This machine, this battered hunk of iron, had saved them more than once. It had carried them through mud, fire, and hell itself. He refused to let it die here. "No," he muttered under his breath, "not like this." The crew watched as Keller dropped down beside the tank, grabbed a wrench, and pried open the engine hatch. "We're fixing her," he said firmly. Dent blinked. "You're kidding, right? We're out of oil, the fuel line's cracked, and the plugs are fried." Keller shot him a look. "Then we'll make it work." For hours they scavenged from the wreckage around them, bits of metal, scraps of hose, anything they could find. From one destroyed German truck, they salvaged a few quarts of oil and a section of tubing. Keller improvised a makeshift seal, using a strip of cloth from his own jacket. Simmons worked beside him, his fingers numb from the cold, but his spirit reawakened by Keller's stubborn determination. As they worked, Dent kept watch with his Thompson, scanning the distant ridge. The Germans had fallen back for now, but no one believed they were gone for good. Time was their enemy. The crew labored in silence, broken only by the occasional metallic clink of tools or the hiss of escaping steam. The smell of burnt rubber and fuel hung in the air. Finally, Keller stood back, wiping sweat and grime from his forehead, despite the freezing air. "All right," he said, climbing into the driver's seat. "Let's see if she still remembers how to breathe." The crew gathered close as he turned the ignition. The engine coughed once, then twice, sputtering weakly. For a moment it seemed it would die again. Dent muttered a quiet curse. Keller tried once more, his hands firm, his jaw clenched. The starter groaned, then caught. A low rumble filled the air. Smoke poured from the exhaust, thick and grey, but the engine was alive. It was rough, uneven, but it ran. Keller looked up through the hatch, eyes wide with disbelief, then grinned. "She's back," he said, almost laughing. The sound drew stares from the men. For a few seconds, none of them spoke. Then Simmons, shaking his head in amazement, murmured, "I'll be damned." Somewhere out in the forest, German patrols surely heard it too, that defiant roar of an American engine that refused to die. To Keller's crew, it wasn't just a machine starting again. It was a promise that they would not be left behind, that they could still fight, still survive. The Germans might have cheered when they thought the Sherman was finished, but now, hearing it come back to life, the echo of that sound carried a message across the silent battlefield. The war wasn't over, and neither were the men inside that tank. The rumble of the revived Sherman rolled through the trees like thunder. To Keller's crew, it was a heartbeat, steady, defiant, alive. But there was no time to celebrate. The Germans were regrouping. From the ridge ahead, movement flickered through the pines. Dent, peering through the periscope, swore under his breath, "They're coming back. Trucks, infantry, maybe armor." The words hung heavy in the cramped steel shell. They had brought the Sherman back to life, but it was far from battle-ready. The ammunition was low, the armor dented, and the engine still coughed like an old man. Yet none of that mattered. Keller's eyes hardened. "Then we fight until she can't move another inch." The men scrambled to their stations. Simmons loaded the last of their high-explosive shells. The loader's hands trembled slightly, not from fear but exhaustion. They had been awake for nearly 40 hours. Keller, gripping the controls, felt the familiar hum of the tank vibrate through his bones. This wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a lifeline. As the German infantry advanced cautiously through the trees, Keller maneuvered the Sherman into a new position behind a rise. The treads grinding against frozen mud, the first German shot cracked through the forest, slamming into the ground a few meters short. Dirt and snow exploded upward. Keller waited. Patience was everything now. When the next German half-track appeared between the trees, Simmons was ready. The cannon fired with a deafening boom, the recoil shaking the entire tank. The shell hit dead center, engulfing the half-track in flame. The Germans scattered, shouts echoing through the smoke-filled woods. But they weren't retreating, they were flanking. Keller saw the movement to the left, the glint of steel helmets. "Machine gun 9 o'clock, he barked. Dent swung the turret, the coaxial Browning chattering to life. Traces cut through the forest gloom, slicing into the German line. Branches shattered and soldiers dove for cover. Inside the tank, the heat rose fast. The smell of cordite and oil mixed with sweat. The air was thick, choking. Keller could barely hear over the roar of the engine and the pounding in his ears. Still, he felt something powerful. A surge of unity, of faith in the men around him. Every command was answered instantly. Every movement was precise. They were a machine themselves, as synchronized as the gears turning beneath their feet. Outside, the Germans regrouped again, bringing up a light anti-tank gun. It fired, the shell whistling through the air before striking the Sherman's side armor. The impact was brutal, rattling everyone inside, but the shot failed to penetrate. The sparks danced off the steel. Dent cursed. "They're getting closer." Keller didn't hesitate. "Then we go to them." The Sherman lurched forward, treads biting into the frozen ground. The German soldiers froze for a moment, stunned by the sight of the tank charging straight at them, smoke billowing from its rear, its cannons swiveling like a predator's eye. Keller pushed the throttle to its limit, the engine roaring louder than ever before. The Germans scattered again, abandoning their gun as the Sherman smashed through their position. When the dust settled, the clearing was silent except for the hiss of steam escaping the tank's vents. The Germans who hadn't fled stood with their hands raised, pale and shaken. Keller's crew looked out from the hatches, speechless. In that moment, the impossible had become real. A crippled tank, resurrected by sheer willpower, had just turned the tide of a fight it had no business winning. Keller didn't smile. He simply nodded to his men and said, "Let's keep moving. There's still a war out there." Behind them, the destroyed German guns smoked in the snow. Ahead, the forest opened toward the road, and the faint sound of other American engines in the distance. The Sherman rolled on, battered but unstoppable, its echo carrying the spirit of men who refused to die quietly. The sun was beginning to rise when Keller's Sherman emerged from the forest, its treads leaving deep scars in the frost-covered road. The pale light glinted off the tank's scorched armor, revealing the story written on its hull. Bullet marks, shrapnel dents, and the faint outline of soot where flames had once licked its sides. Inside, the crew sat in silence. None of them spoke for a long while. They were too tired, too hollowed by what they had endured. The adrenaline that had fueled them for hours was fading, leaving behind only disbelief that they were still alive. As they drove slowly toward the faint sound of American artillery, they passed the wreckage of what had been a German convoy. Blackened trucks, overturned half-tracks and burned-out guns lined the road. Smoke hung thick in the still air. Simmons looked out from his position, his voice quiet. "We really did it." "Didn't we?" Keller didn't answer. He was staring straight ahead, gripping the controls. "We did what we had to." His tone wasn't prideful, it was weary, grounded. To him, survival wasn't victory. It was duty fulfilled. A few miles ahead, they finally saw movement. American soldiers from another battalion. When the Sherman rolled into view, the men on the ground froze. The tank looked like a ghost from another world, its engine coughing and its gun blackened from endless firing. Then someone shouted, "Holy hell, they made it!" Cheers broke out. Keller stopped the tank, and the crew climbed out one by one. Sunlight caught their faces, exhausted, filthy, but alive. An officer approached, disbelief on his face. "We thought you were gone. Command wrote you off yesterday morning." Keller simply nodded. "We almost were." He gestured back toward the forest, but the tank wasn't ready to quit. The officer stared at the Sherman, shaking his head. "You brought that thing back from the dead." Keller gave a faint smile. "She brought herself back. We just gave her a reason. Later that afternoon, the tank was refueled and repaired as best as field engineers could manage. But word of its comeback spread quickly. Other crews came by just to see it, to see the tank that had stopped a German push on its own. They ran their hands over the patched armor and bullet scars like pilgrims at a shrine. One mechanic, still in disbelief, muttered, "I've never seen anything like it. That engine shouldn't have run another second." But Keller knew the truth. Machines could surprise you just like men. They both had limits only revealed when pushed to the edge. His crew sat around a small fire that night, warming their hands. No one spoke of medals or recognition. They didn't need to. In their hearts they knew they'd witnessed something rare, a moment when courage, faith and stubborn defiance turned disaster into survival. Before turning in, Keller walked over to the Sherman one last time. The moonlight reflected softly off its battered frame. He placed his hand on the armor, cold and rough under his glove. "You and me," he whispered quietly, almost reverently. "We're not done yet." Somewhere in the distance, artillery thundered again. The war raged on, indifferent to miracles. But on that frozen road, one tank and 5 men had proven that even when everything seems lost, when engines fail and hope burns low, willpower can make steel breathe again. The Germans had cheered when they thought the Sherman had died, believing fate had done their work for them. But when they heard that engine roar back to life, they realized something far greater. Machines could be rebuilt, battles could be lost, but the spirit of men who refused to give up could never be silenced.